Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. It is 7 o'clock, and we're going to start our free Zoom meeting. And tonight our subject is about succession planting and companion planting. We've already kind of covered this in previous classes a little bit, but tonight I just wanted to focus on some of the realities of this because we've had requests to be able to do this. Last week in our class, I was asked to do this specifically, so we're going to go into this a little bit more. So succession planting, meaning what you plant after other crops, all right? And companion planting, meaning which crops do good together. Now, the reality is this subject is very, very much overcomplicated. People overcomplicate this all the time. They think they're afraid to figure out which which plants will do good with another one, and they think that if they're planting one thing, maybe they shouldn't plant something else with it. So this whole idea of companion planting and planting things, what you should plant before a crop or after a crop, it stops people from growing the things that they would normally grow. So stop worrying about it and just grow a garden. Today, I looked on Google and I Googled what is a good companion plant for garlic, and a lot of things came up. Then I said, what is a good companion plant for strawberries? A lot of things came up. And then I just asked Google, can I plant garlic and tomatoes together as a companion plant? And there were articles that came up that said, yes, they're a great companion plant. And other garden websites came up and said, you should never plant those together. So that is pretty fascinating to me that they don't really like, they don't like being together in one person's garden, and other people say they do great together. So a lot of this idea of companion planting and succession planting it's more folklore than science. It's more like, I don't know, it's tradition. There aren't like really good scientific information out there on this. Now, you will have people who absolutely believe and swear. They'll swear by their religion that these certain plants do great together or that they don't do good together. And I'm not talking about strawberries and garlic. I'm talking about any plants that they have specific, experience with. So it's a fascinating and a wonderful world we live in when we get into the whole companion planting. And it's interesting because people believe certain things, and then you find somebody else who is doing it completely different. I had a guy telling me a few years ago at a farm that I was working at, and they said, oh, you can never plant sage by anything else. It will stop everything else from growing. Well, I've planted a lot of things with sage and everything thrived. So I don't know that companion planting is a very good science. Now, there's a lot of good books on companion planting, and they're interesting and they're fun. And what they write is probably true, but it's not replicatable in every situation, in every climate, in every soil. So as you travel throughout the world and you see these things happening with succession and companion planting and the way that people do things in all the different various microclimates of the world, which are millions of microclimates, you will find that gardeners have success and failures doing many different things. So I don't have a list of plants that go together. I do not have a list of plants that you should not plant together. It's just way overcomplicated in the world that we live in. The key to companion planting is the soil health principle of diversity. If we are focused on diversity and we're focusing on a minimum of 4 plant families growing in the soil, then we're going to have pretty good success. Let me just share an experience I had this week, which is pretty awesome. I had a group of people who were they were coming to see the greenhouse, and we were walking through the greenhouse and we were enjoying things, and they were struggling to find anything that they didn't like. Although it's a jungle in there, there's a lot of things I don't like, but they were like, wow, this is perfect, this is great. And while we were doing that, I noticed in my cabbage patch, I found a few pests. There was one cabbage that had some aphids that were multiplying on it. There was another cabbage that had some holes in it from some cabbage looper worms. And so this is interesting to me because a week ago I couldn't find an aphid. And so in the last week we have started getting some. But what happened 2 weeks ago? We went through that cabbage patch and I removed all of the spinach that was growing in there because it was old and hot weather's coming. So all the spinach went away to give the cabbage plenty of room to expand and mature. And we removed all of the weeds. So we turned that into a monocrop. Now, my question for people way smarter than me is, did we turn off the quorum sensing that is happening in the microbiome, in the root systems, so that now those cabbages are not exhibiting the secondary metabolites that they may have had we left a few of the weeds in there? So that is an interesting thing. Why did I take all the weeds out? Because every weed species in there was going to seed, and that's how I manage my weeds. If they're not going to seed, I will often let them grow. But if they are a noxious weed, like if I see a crabgrass or morning glory, they're out of there. I never let them grow at all. And then any other weeds, if they start going to seed, I take them out. Well, I had 2 or 3 grasses that were going to seed. I took them out. I had some red root amaranth. I took it out. I had some lamb's quarters. I took it out because it was all going to seed. And there wasn't anything left to leave there. And my spinach, I took it out because I didn't want it there anymore, because we had already picked those plants 4 or 5 times. They were mature. They were done. It was over. So I just cleaned it up to make it look nicer. Maybe that was a mistake because now I have a few pests. Although I did pick those cabbages this morning actually, and they were not hurt at all. They were not damaged. Just some of the bigger, older leaves had the problems, and those are being eaten right now. I actually went to some customers. The inside of the cabbage had absolutely no insect damage, and they were perfect once we took the older leaves off. So that is an interesting thing that has happened to me. And it's like, it's one of those things where we sit here and we preach what will happen when we do soil health and we follow the principles. And then when we break a rule, or I was kind of forced to break the rule of turning that row into a monocrop because I didn't have any choices. What was I supposed to do? Transplant in some other weird things that were never going to mature? I'm not going to go to that length. It's not practical. And so when I had to take out the plants that were there, I went ahead and did it. And then a week later, it was actually about 2 weeks later, it's 14 to 18 days later, a few pests started showing up. So that is fascinating to me. And I don't have a real conclusion to that, other than my observation showed that when I removed the polycrop down to 1 species, well, I got pests. I know that's what happened, but was the quorum sensing, was the quorum sensing actually happening before that? I don't know. But they showed absolutely no disease or pests before that, and now they are showing some pests. So very fascinating thing that happened to me this week. Here's what I do with succession planting. I divide all my crops into cold and hot weather groups. So I have a group of hot weather crops and a group of cold weather crops, and then I plant appropriately and I try to mix them up. I always want to have a minimum of 4 plant families growing in the same ground together so that their roots can mingle. That's how I do my companion planting. I simply mix up the roots. So things like lettuce and spinach and miner's lettuce, which is Claytonia, those things are super cold weather crops. Things like kale, cold weather crops. So I don't plan a lot of that for the summertime. In the summer, I'm growing a lot more of the things like tomatoes, peppers, squashes, cucumbers, that kind of thing. Now, we want lettuce year round. We want spinach year round. So yeah, I grow some of that, but not a lot. So I have 2 full beds that are completely warm weather crops. And we have to remember plant family is the key to turn on the quorum sensing, which means the secondary metabolites are working in the plant, which means you have pest resistance and disease resistance. So we do the pest resistance, we do the disease resistance. That's good, it's happening, it's working. But what do we actually do? You plant 4 plant families together. So in the summertime, peppers and tomatoes are 1 plant family. So if you think you're getting 2 plant families, you're not. They're both the nightshade family. And so we have to mix in other things with that. I do like to grow some plants that can grow better in the shade in the summer, like lettuce. It does require full sun. It likes full sun, but in the summer when it's hot with that full sun blurring down, you can grow some lettuce in the shade of the bigger tomato plants and get away with some quality lettuce that way. When I do that, I am watering every single day to keep it cooler, to keep it fresh, so that I don't have bitter lettuce, because lettuce is hard to grow. Also, the varieties of lettuce are pretty important. Yeah, I want to focus on the varieties of lettuce so that that is working out pretty awesome. So that we have the warm weather varieties. And how do you know if your lettuce is warm weather or cold weather variety? You read the descriptions in the seed catalogs. And if it's a good seed catalog, it will tell you. So when I'm doing succession, which means what plant do I plant after another plant? So my tomatoes are done for the year. I rip those out, and that happens sometime between September and Christmas. So we take those out, and what do we put in after them? Well, obviously it's the cold weather crops because it's cold weather after that point. But I don't worry too much about which specific species go in. But I do want to have 4 plant families going in that tomato patch because we want to keep those roots mingling all the time with a different plant family. So the thing that I focus on is rotating the fibrous roots with the taproot roots. It's better to grow fibrous roots and taproots together for soil health because the taproots are going to create large channels going deep into the soil. Fibrous roots are going to be putting an amazing amount of carbon in the soil. So a tomato would be a fibrous root. A radish would be a taproot. A beet is a taproot. A turnip is a taproot. A carrot and a parsnip. Scarouzanera, salsify, those are taproots. Mustards are taproots. So what would the fibrous roots be? Let's think of some vegetables that are fibrous roots. Lettuce, spinach, and fibrous roots. All of your grains. You may not be growing grains so much in your vegetable garden, but people need to be growing more grains because that's how you get the free fertilizer from the air called carbon into your soil, is with those fibrous roots. And the grass family does it the best. One single cereal rye plant can have hundreds of miles of roots in the soil. I was once told that by a scholar that it was 380 miles, and later I learned that those are the visible roots. The microscopic root hairs are even more, up to thousands of miles of root hairs, which boggles my mind. How in the world did anybody ever figure that out? Hopefully you have taken a screenshot of this. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So here is how I have taken some very popular crops that most people have in their gardens, and I've just divided these into cool season and warm season. So in the cool season, I call that spring, fall, and winter. The warm season, that's spring, summer, and fall. So depending on how early in the spring, it could still be cold weather, and how late in the fall, that could be cold weather. So you just kind of have to think about your climate. If it's going to be freezing at night, it's still probably your cool season. And if so, kind of look at your frost dates. You can look up frost dates for your zip code on the internet, and it will tell you your average spring frost, your last one before summer, and your average first fall frost, your first frost when the winter comes. So we can just look at these quickly. So the cool season crops: broccoli, cabbage, onions, potatoes, carrots, Brussels sprouts, lettuce, spinach, garlic, cilantro. Now there's an interesting one in here: potatoes. Yes, they are a cool season crop, but you generally grow them super early. They can handle some light frosts as they are coming up. And if they're a foot tall and then it freezes, that's a little too big. But if the leaves are just starting to come out and you're still experiencing a week or two of your last frosts, that's okay. You'll get a bumper crop. So potatoes could be considered a warm weather crop or a cool season crop, either one, really. But if it freezes and totally kills a plant, I have put them in the warm season. So tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, eggplants, sweet potatoes, all of your melons, all of your squashes, basil, turmeric, and ginger. If it freezes a little bit, these guys are pretty much dead. There could be some exceptions out there, but as far as I know, these guys are basically dead. If there's anything else on these lists, you can ask me and we can talk about this list more if you'd like to discuss it as far as cool season and warm season goes. So succession of seasons. When it is winter time, I like to be picking, excuse me, when it's winter time, I like to be picking in my greenhouse all of these cool season things. I like to have cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, all that stuff in my greenhouse that I'm harvesting. Is kale on the kale is not even on this list. It should be, but a lot of that stuff we're just harvesting all of the time, and it's good and it's wonderful and it's great. And so we're harvesting this stuff. It's going out to customers. We are eating it and we are enjoying it. So some warm season crops you start early. I usually start my tomato and pepper seeds at the end of February. I keep them in a very small house in my greenhouse. And I actually have a picture of it right here. So there's the small greenhouse, and I start my seedlings in here year round. And every week of the year, I plant 1 to 2 trays. At this time of the year, I'm planting 4 or 5. Every month, I plant these trays, 4 or 5. But at least once a month, I plant 1 tray. Okay, so once a month, I plant at least 1 tray, and it just has a mix of things in it that I plant year round because they work in the summer or the fall. But for me to have a list of saying, when you take out a pepper plant, you should always have a strawberry to put in its place. I'm not that strict. Mix it up. If your succession is a list and a chart of exactly what to do, you're probably going to have problems gardening. You're probably going to be running into issues because you need to be mixing things up all the time. I've mixed plant families together for a long time, and I've always, for the most part, I've had beautiful crops. Now, once in a while, I'll have a problem, and we have a crop that's causing an issue. Like, oh, this is just not doing good, and I'm not sure why. And that happens to everyone. But overall, I get pretty good harvests by mixing things up. We talked about the tap roots and the fibrous roots. Well, here's an example. I'll just point at this with my pointer here. So this is a cereal rye plant, and see these fibrous roots there? The root systems are much larger on this, but when I pulled it up, it was in very compacted soil, and the roots just didn't come up. They broke off. But you can see all these little roots here. So this is a cereal rye. This is probably 5 or 6 cereal rye plants. And a rye plant will have many, many branches, and a grass that has branches, those branches are called tillers. And I believe that when the Bible said to be a tiller of the soil or to till the earth, that this could be what it was talking about. Although I don't think that the translation was correct. I think it was a different translation. When you go back to the Hebrew, and the Greek, and you look up how it was translated into English, I don't think that had anything to do with it. So that's just my personal belief, but you can do your own etymology research on that. But here's a daikon radish that shows a taproot. Now it looks very much like a carrot or a parsnip or a scruzanera or a salsify, a big old wild, some of the wild things out there, like a perennial pepperweed, they will have these long, slender roots that go deep into the soil. They help to have channels that go down through hard soil, through compacted soil, that will hit the hard pans. They can help break up those hard pans, and when they rot and die, they leave these big open channels for oxygen to get in, which is one of the most important nutrients in the soil, is oxygen to get in there. And the earthworms love to eat these. It helps to give them a good food supply. The third plant here in this photo is it's the hairy vetch, and this is a young hairy vetch. It would be fun to have a picture of one with a flower on, but here they are, and you can see in this picture the rhizosheath. Excuse me, I lost my slide here. Okay, so here's the rhizosheath. The rhizosheath is when you have, rhizo means root, sheath means it's encased in something, like the sheath, a knife has a sheath, and so it's encased in something. And so the rhizosheath is this dirt that is stuck to these roots. So these are extremely, very healthy, wonderful roots that are on here. And the thing that is causing the roots to stick to it is called glomulin. And that is a glue that is made by microbes. And different species of microbes make the glue. Fungus makes the glue. Bacteria makes the glue. They glue themselves to the surface of these roots, and they work in symbiosis because the microbes mineralize the sand, silts, and clays and give the plants the minerals they need. Mineralize means that they dissolve the minerals so that the plants get things like molybdenum, zinc, copper, iron, that just the things that plants need to grow. And then the plant feeds those microbes sugars, because the plant makes sugars. Powered by sunlight, it takes water and carbon dioxide from the air, and the CO2. They get together with the water, the hydrogen. It all makes and we're not going to go into that scientific part of it today, but photosynthesis uses those elements, and it makes sugar, and it feeds the microbes in this soil. And so I put it on this white paper here so that you can see that picture really awesome right there, so that you can see the rhizosheath, because that's what a healthy root should look like. It should be covered with the roots. When I went to college, they taught us that white roots that had nothing sticking to it was a healthy root, but we have learned since then that this is now the true doctrine of soil health. So that is pretty fun and awesome. So these, I've got two pictures here. I thought I had two pictures. I have one picture here, and this is a lettuce crop. I'm going to get one more cutting off of this lettuce. So this lettuce was in the winter. I had already taken, I think, 4 to 6 cuttings off of this. Some of them are getting old. See this species here? It's starting to get the brown leaves around here. I probably won't cut that one again. This one will just be taken out and put in the compost. Here's another one with leaves that are starting to brown. The reason they're browning is that is frost damage from the cool weather each night in the winter. This row did not have a floating row cover on it. I wanted to see how these varieties would do when it froze every night, so I left the row cover off to see, and a lot of them did very well. But what I'm doing here, if you can see right here where my pointer is, this is a cordless drill, and we have a shaft going down, and this is an auger, a drill auger. So this drills a hole inside of just the soil here, and I am planting. If you look right here, this is a broccoli plant. Right here is a broccoli plant. You can see my paper pot here. Here's a broccoli plant. There's the pot. Here's a broccoli plant. So what I love to do is keep that living root in the soil. So when we're talking about succession planting, I am planting this about 1 to 2 weeks before this crop is removed. So I got all these broccolis in here. I drilled these holes at the correct spacing. So here's one, here's one, here's one, here's one. These are the correct spacing for the broccoli. You can't quite see this one, it's being covered, but you can just catch the edge right there where my pointer is of the paper pot. So the plant is just under those leaves there. And then I'm drilling another hole here in the center. I had these beets, this red beet, and I wasn't going to take these out for a while. And so I felt like I could get one right in here. And so this is how I planted them 1 to 2 weeks before the lettuce was gone. And then after the lettuce was gone, we go in and we just gently twist those plants out. We do not pull them. I grab the entire head of lettuce once it's finished. We're done cutting it because this is a cut and come again garden. So I cut it off. I take the top away and then the leaves grow back again. So I leave 2 to 3 inches of length on those leaves. So we're just cutting the top 2 or 3 inches off. And that leaves a lot of root, the leaf surface there. So it grows very rapidly. It grows back quick. I'm excited about this because this has been working. So when you're doing succession planting, do this. Just, don't worry so much about the species that you're planting back in, but worry about leaving that living root in the soil and get them planted 2 to 3 weeks before your other crop comes out. That's been working for me really well. And I really love that. When I'm planting in this little greenhouse. I simply water it with a watering can, but you can see my tray. Look at my tray right here where my pointer is. I have a whole bunch of different crops in this one tray. This is a 200 cell tray, and I have a bunch of different things in here. I've got the green onions, I've got cilantro and beets, and there's lettuce in here. I can't really see the lettuce, but I almost always plant lettuce in a tray. And you can see a bunch of the empty cells here. That's because this tray has got big enough that I've started planting some things out. Maybe that's why we don't see the lettuce. I've already transplanted it out. But as far as succession goes, always plant once a month, plant a tray like this so that you can keep your garden going year round. And this is how you get a 365-day harvest. If you don't have a greenhouse, build one. If you don't have a cold frame, build one. If you're not eating fresh foods year round, you're cheating yourself because you could be. And it's a great thing to do. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Here we are, and this is what miner's lettuce when it looks like when it first comes up. Down there by my right hand in the walkway of my greenhouse, this is miner's lettuce that is just coming up volunteer. This is one reason I don't like to till and keep everything clean. I keep things kind of like a jungle. Look at this big grass here. I've cut this grass about 5 times since it started growing. And every time I cut it, it goes in my compost to feed my microbes. It could be fed to a milk cow or a goat or a sheep or laying hens, chickens. They love to eat stuff like this. If it was for chickens, I would cut it into maybe 1/2 inch lengths with a pair of scissors as I feed it to the chickens so they can eat it. Because chickens will grab a blade of grass and rip it off, but it has to be anchored to the roots. It's very hard for them to eat it if it's just a big long piece of grass. But it's good food in this young growth stage. It's good. So I just let this grass grow. It's still growing in my greenhouse right now. This picture was taken this last winter, and this stuff is growing in the middle of the winter. This is December of this last year, and look at these brand new sprouts coming up. Cold weather. By the way, right behind me here is that is celery that's growing. We had a lot of beautiful celery. Super fun to grow celery. So as far as succession and companion planting go, let things grow that you normally wouldn't. This is mature right here. This is absolutely mature Claytonia, which is miner's lettuce. It's the same thing. So this is the parent plant. It was growing here last year, and then it came up earlier than this one. And it went to seed. The seeds all fell right here. This one died or went dormant or whatever it does. I don't even know if it's an annual or perennial or what it does. I don't know that much about the Claytonia. All I know is that it comes up every year, and I have to pull a lot of it out like a weed. So be careful with it if you don't want to do a lot of weeding, but it's a great food to let grow. So this is something that I do. I let the succession happen naturally with the way that it works in the Just the way, everything's happening. Uh, I let the seasons pick succession. If I was in charge of everything, I wouldn't get gifts like this. I love getting gifts from ecology. And yeah, so there we go. Let's go to the next slide and see what we got. Here I have strawberries and garlic growing right now. Excuse me. Right now, this garlic is about ready to harvest. It's still completely green. Now I'm talking because this was February, so I'm not talking about February. I'm talking about currently. I'm talking about today. I'm talking about Thursday, June 16th, 2022. This garlic that you're seeing in this picture that was taken in February, today it is ready to harvest. And these strawberries are about a foot tall, and you can't see the ground at all right now. You have to push those strawberries back. And so let's just look in here at the idea of crop diversity. And we have a red root amaranth right here that's growing. We have a Claytonia that's growing right here. Those are two different plant families. We have the strawberry, a different plant family. The garlic is our fourth plant family. I think this is like a weed. I think this is this one right here on the bottom. That is oh, I know what that is. I can think of the politically incorrect name. We used to call it Indian tobacco. Oh, curly dock. That's more politically accepted. So anyway, right here, this is curly dock. And then right here at the very bottom of the screen, if you look, if you can see that, depending on how big your screen is or how it's formatted with this may be off your screen, but right over here in the bottom corner, that's a dandelion leaf. And then here's a random grass. Who knows what kind of grass that is? If I see random grass, I usually pick it and don't let it grow for a while, because if it's quiet grass, it will spread in and be a nightmare to get out. But there's quite a few plant families growing in here. And I do let these weeds get kind of big, meaning 6 to 8 inches tall. And then I'll go through and I'll take out any of them that are going to seed. And if they are shading any of my food crops, I certainly take them out. So this is one way I do succession and companion planting. I let the plants grow that want to grow, but I manage them and don't let the weeds seeds germinate and reproduce. And but we've been getting a good harvest of strawberries, and the garlic is huge. I need to measure one of the tape measure, but it's way over 2 feet tall from the ground surface to the tips. Now it's way over 2 feet tall. So this was February, so March, April, May, June. So 4 months ago, this picture was taken, and now it's getting close to harvest. It'll probably be, a good 3 weeks from now until these completely dry up. And that is when when garlic is ready to harvest, is these stems will yellow. All these leaves will yellow all the way down. The plant will look dead. That's when you dig your garlic. Now, you see how these ones are yellowing right now in February? You're like, well, wait, they're going yellow now. You got to realize that this is on the edge of my greenhouse. These were not protected with a floating row cover. So these were freezing every night. Not super bad frost, but some nights it may have been getting as cold as 28 right here in this part of the greenhouse. So that's pretty awesome. But we grew a very good crop there this year. This is November 2021, so last November, and we were still ripening strawberries in November, which was pretty wonderful to be able to do that in the greenhouse, to take strawberries all the way through the year and still have strawberries to pick in November. Here again, we can see the different kind of companion planting. This week, I actually was harvesting these carrots. So these are paper pots right here, paper pot, paper pot, paper pot. So these are all paper. These are all paper pots that were planted to carrots. I put anywhere from 5 to 8 seeds, carrot seeds, in each paper pot. I germinate them in the propagation house, and then I bring them out here and I transplant them in here. And I knew that the carrots would take a while before it was time to harvest them. And so I dibbled holes in and transplanted lettuce in. And we harvested these lettuces as a baby lettuce so that they did not shade any of these carrots. So we were we were maximizing the square footage here for that to happen. So that was pretty awesome and pretty wonderful to be able to do that. Once the lettuce had matured and was gone, I came in and I put green onions in here. And so right now I am harvesting mature green onions and mature carrots at the same time. So that is a companion planting and a succession type of thing that I did and I'm doing currently. Excuse me. Here again, we have a bed right here. This is young garlic that's coming up. In the middle of the bed, I put a row of lettuce all the way up the middle. On this edge, we put a row of beets. We had a big, beautiful crop of beets during the time that this garlic grew. If you're growing garlic, you need to be growing things in the garlic because the garlic takes so long. You're going to plant garlic in September or October, and you're not going to harvest it until June or July. So it's growing for an amazing amount of time. You can get 2 or 3, maybe 4 other crops in the same bed with your garlic. And then over here, this is showing my mature kale. This kale was over a year old, and we just keep picking. I was about to remove these kale plants, and so I came in, and underneath you can see right here the baby seedlings of kale. I dibbled these in and transplanted this whole area, and now we have a whole nother crop of kale. It's not as big as these, but it's getting about half as big as these mature ones at this point, because this picture was taken a good 6 months ago. So that's another look at succession planting and companion planting. Now here I have these were contender bush beans. So the beans do not get very tall. I planted these as a fall crop. We were harvesting these into the beginning of October. We got a nice little mess of green beans. But before I harvested these beans, I planted daikon radishes because the beans are a fibrous root, and I wanted to have a taproot in here for the soil health. So this plant right here is a daikon radish. I actually brought seeds in. I usually do transplants, but I actually dibbled seeds in here. And so these are this size. This is the first day that I harvested the green beans. So about 1 week, 1 to 2 weeks. I don't know. These plants look like they're about a week old since they've been up. So this was probably about 2 weeks before I picked these first green beans that these daikon radishes were seeded. When I picked the last of these green beans, because if you look at these plants, you can see there's still flowers on here. So they gave us beans for quite a while. And when I picked the last beans off of these plants and they were done with their crop, these daikon radishes were the same height as these here. And I don't think it hurt the crop at all. It worked out to be very, very good to have those as companion plants. So there we are. We've looked at all our slides. We can open this up for questions now. And let me see about finding some questions on here. So I have a question, and I get this question all the time. People tell me about their tomatoes. They say, and so the question is, I get a black rotted dry spot on the bottom of my tomatoes, and the tomatoes do not get very big. What am I doing wrong? Okay, you're not doing anything wrong. Your tomato plant is not absorbing enough calcium. That's what's happening. This is all about calcium. And if you have plants that won't absorb calcium from your conditions, it's best to breed a landrace tomato of your own that will thrive in your conditions. But that takes time, and that doesn't help you get a crop this year or next year. So you need to give extra calcium to the soil that the excuse me, that the plants can absorb easily. So if you eat eggs, save all of your eggshells, crush them up, put them in the blender, turn them into a powder, and put a tablespoon, a teaspoon, or a tablespoon, it doesn't matter. Just get some calcium in the bottom of your transplanting hole. When you dig the hole to put your tomato transplant in the garden, put that in there. Bone meal would do the same thing. So bone meal, but you have to purchase bone meal unless you're butchering your own animals and you're saving your own bones and you have a big machine to crush the bones into powder. So it's a lot easier to do it with eggshells. You can also buy calcium, other things have calcium, but usually eggshells is the simplest way to go because most people who garden eat eggs. And so just save the eggshells and that should clear it up. And I've told people this for years and years and years in all the gardening classes I've done for almost 20 years now. And everybody who's done it, they've come back later and say, oh, it worked so good. The eggshells took care of it. I didn't have any problems. So that's a good one right there. And so I have another question here. And this question is more about using the microscope. And the question is, how hard is it to learn the microscope to be able to do soil testing like you do in your laboratory? Okay, I am a soil scientist. I do have a laboratory and I do soil samples. And so I actually, I charge $150 for a soil sample to do the work. And it does take technical training. How hard is it? That I don't know how to, I don't know. If you're a pretty good student, if you could take a college class and get a good grade, you're going to be fine. If you know how to study, you know how to memorize, and you know how to figure it out, it's fine. If you have trouble, with the basics, if you're struggling to read, let's say you're a young person, let's say you're 12 years old, you've struggled academically, certainly get into that microscope and start learning it. It's going to be more of a challenge than if you can just read a bunch of stuff about it. But usually I can train somebody, whether they're a good traditional student or not, in one day. In one day, I can train you to know what you're looking for in that soil, sample. I can show you, I can teach you so that you can recognize the organisms and what you're doing. So there's the technical part of running the microscope, making the dilution, figuring out, figuring out how to just run all of the equipment. Like getting things in focus can be hard. Doing the bacterial count can be hard. It can be tricky. It's going to take practice after you learn, what it is I'm doing. I actually have a slide of the microscope here. Let me go see if I can find it. Flipping through all these pictures, this is insane. Okay, where the heck is it? There we go. So here's my daughter. This was the look on her face when she saw her first microarthropod in the microscope, because a microarthropod, they look like the little spider, a little fat spider, so that's pretty awesome. But we do this in my class, and so that's pretty awesome. But as far as the microscope goes, it's not hard to train a person on the microscope, but there is a level of being able to understand what you're doing. So there's two parts to this. There is the technical part of running the equipment, which I already said, but the second part of running a microscope is identifying the organisms and what you're actually seeing. So this takes time, but the awesome thing is, with the world we live in today, there's dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of YouTube videos that are high quality, very good, where you can get on there and they will show you what you're looking at. If you just spent, I think if a person spent 5 or 6 hours on the internet just trying to identify and see what these guys look like, you would be able to see these things in your own soil. The sad excuse me, the sad part is when people are looking at their own soil sample and then all they're seeing is bacteria. It's hard to see bacteria. You need to be trained to see it. You're going to mostly be seeing that at a 400 times magnification, and you can see them at much lower magnifications, but you kind of have to have a trained eye to know what you're seeing. And most soil samples, you will always see some bacteria in there, but you have to have a really good functioning soil to see high levels of fungus, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, and on and on. A lot of times people mix up certain minerals, things like cellulose, and they start thinking that those are other things in the soil, and they're really not. So hopefully that answers that question about how hard it is to run a microscope. It's not hard, but it takes time. If you're really excited about it, that's the main thing. You just need motivation. You need motivation and some time. And just to recap, there are two parts to it. There's identifying what you're actually seeing, and then there's running the hardware of how to set up the microscope and how to make the dilutions so that you actually can see what it is you're wanting to see and to understand. So okay, so let's if there's any questions, go ahead and ask those, and we can talk about any questions you may have. You can either type it in to the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and talk to me if you have any questions.
I don't know what happened to the picture.
Hello, Melanie. How are you tonight?
We are good. We were not at home.
Okay.
So you're coming to us in our car.
Well, that's fun.
Would you put that back up on your screen, that last visual that you had? Oh, John says it's there.
Which one?
Oh, that. Never mind. You have it there.
The one with the microscope?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's my daughter looking at, that's the first time she saw a microarthropod. It scared her to death. It's pretty awesome.
That's so fun. I'm sorry we missed your presentation. We'll have to listen to this.
Yeah, that's fine. No problem. All right, Melanie, John, do you guys have any questions tonight?
Oh, I don't know.
Do you have a question? Oh, what's this?
I'm thinking about it.
All right. Let me just show you.
Muted?
I can show you this. This is kind of the system that I use. It goes along with my presentation a little bit, because we were talking about starting a tray once, every month. And so I use this 200 plug cell tray, and I always plant at least one a month, and it's depending on how much food I need to produce. If it's just me and my family and like maybe 10, 15, 20 people, I'm planting a 200 plug cell once a month. But if I have, 50 to 100 people that we're feeding, we're planting anywhere from 6 to 10 of these once a month to have enough food to feed the people. And there's two different systems. On the left side here, you can see the cordless drill with the auger. And I showed pictures of that earlier in the lettuce patch. And then I use the paper pots. So I make a paper pot out of 4 or 5 thicknesses of a newspaper, or out of like cardboard, and they make good pots. And then I fill them with worm castings, and then I put the little seedlings in there. Some plants I will put their seeds directly in there, like the I could put anywhere from 5 to 8 carrot seeds in here. And then you don't thin the carrots, you just put them in the ground, and you drill the hole with this. But the advantage to having them in a pot is you can grow them for about a month in here before you transplant them out. So that's 1 month of growing, because it takes carrots sometimes a week to 2 weeks to even germinate. And then they're growing in the pot for about 2 weeks, and then you put them out. So 1 month is a long time to have these guys, to just have it in the garden, not doing much. So I like them to do that slow process here, and then I get them in the garden, because then in the garden bed, I can be growing something else for an entire month. So I can grow a lot more food on the same square footage. And so that's why I use this system. Now this system over here, is the 200 plug cell tray. And we can just pull the transplants out. We dibble a hole with this thing. This is just a sharpened stick. And so we just poke a hole in the ground and then the cell just goes right in. And as soon as we plant these, we water them and then they're off and running. And so that works very good. So depending on what species they are, if they grow slower in the beginning, I'll often use the paper pot. If they grow pretty quick, I will be using just a direct transplant from this. But I hardly ever start seeds directly in the garden. Some things I do, but very, very seldom. I transplant almost everything now. So that's just the way I do it. Now corn, I do direct seed corn, but I don't grow that in my greenhouse. So this kind of goes along with how I actually do some of the companion planting and the succession planting with our presentation tonight. This is kind of the systems that I use because it works really well. And then here's the picture I already showed, but here's the cordless drill, and I'm getting these plants planted before the lettuce comes out. Okay, John and Melanie, do you have any questions for us tonight? All right.
I do have a question, William. It took a minute to get this open.
Okay, go ahead.
What do you use for a planting medium when you're starting your seeds like that in those 8 little pots?
Okay, so what I love to use is the I like to use worm castings out of my worm bin. So it's just the pure worm castings. So it's a compost that I make and then the worms eat it. It makes the best potting soil I've ever used. If you don't have that available to you, which most people probably don't, then I would just go to a big box store that has a garden center like a Lowe's or a Home Depot or whatever, and buy 1 bale of peat moss, 1 bale of a potting soil, and some builder's sand, just some coarse sand like you'd mix up a mortar with in a concrete. And I put 1/3 peat moss, 1/3 sand, and 1/3 of the cheap potting soil, and I mix it up thoroughly, and that usually makes a pretty good potting soil. But I don't really like that too much because you don't always know what you're getting when you're purchasing something. But you know, usually it grows plants.
So they sell worm castings in a bag. Have you ever seen that or used that?
I never have purchased worm castings from anybody else, but I do know that it is sold. Yeah, so it would be interesting to do an experiment and see how they did. Yeah, because I mean the biggest I think benefit of using the worm castings is that you have all the living microbes in abundance. You would have a lot of the bacteria, fungus, beneficial nematodes, the protozoa. They would all be in there in pretty good numbers. But if it's been sitting in a bag that's sealed up, even if it has little air holes poked in it, that's not enough oxygen. So those things are beginning to go away. So a lot of those organisms are going to be, you know, sporulating and cystating, which means that they're going dormant. And they may not wake up and do your plants much good. So if it's been sitting on a shelf at Home Depot for, you know, 9 months or a year before it got sold and you're the one who bought it, it may not be that great. So, you know, I mean, that's not good news, but most of my classes are not that great of news. So, so sorry about that. I'm just trying to tell the truth here. Okay, if anybody else.
So I don't know whether you've done drip. Well, someone has told us that the best way to get pressure from a drip line or from a line is to do it in a circle. You know anything about that? So
No,
that you,
I don't,
At the beginning.
yeah, I have no idea what they're talking about. I mean, I've used a lot of
Yeah.
different types of drip lines and soaker hoses, and I mean, I don't know. I
it's an
don't know what they mean by putting it in a circle. That just,
yeah, so it's an enclosed system, so that, enclosed system rather than being a straight line. It comes back to the beginning and
oh yeah, I see. I get it. I know what you're saying. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. I've never done it that way, but I always have had fine pressure with what I'm doing. I always have too much pressure is my problem. So I always have to put pressure regulators on the beginning so that it doesn't blow the drip lines up. So I always have the opposite problem. I
Yeah.
do know some, I mean, sometimes like we had garden rows once that were 750 feet long. That's a pretty good run, you know, but we still had enough pressure. So yeah.
What are your questions that you have? Okay, well, I have a situation where I have not been able to plant things. They're still in their little pots because our garden isn't ready for them to plant. Some things have died, but those things that have not, I guess I just put them in the garden and hope for the best, huh? Or,
Well, if your garden is ready, go ahead and plant them. If
They're
you're
not.
if it's gonna be another couple of weeks, make paper pots that are, you know, 3 or 4 times bigger than the pots they're in, and pot them up into bigger pots. That's a very common thing. I do that a lot. So just pot them in a bigger pot, and then when you're ready to plant it, since it's in a cardboard or paper pot, you plant the entire pot, and then you don't disturb the root systems on that second transplanting when it goes into the garden.
Do you have instructions for your little paper pots that you make?
Just wrap a paper around a tin can and put a rubber band on it.
What about the bottom?
You don't need a bottom if it's a piece of cardboard, because you're gonna set it in like a cookie sheet or something, so that the cookie sheet or a cake pan becomes the bottom. And by the time you're ready to transplant it, that soil will have hooked together, like, so it's not going to be falling out because it's been wet, and the tension of the wetness of the soil will keep it from falling apart.
I love that. Have you ever planted anything in toilet paper rolls or paper towel rolls?
I have not, because I feel like it's not a big enough pot to put it in. It's too small. I like to have a larger root ball, because my plant's going to do much better. When you constrict them to those little tiny pots, you only have 1 to 3 weeks of growing, and they start really suffering. Those roots want to get out. And so I like them to be 3 or 4 times that big around. I like a good 3 inches or 4 inches across. So, yeah.
And how deep? What size can are we talking? Like a green bean can?
Yeah, or a bigger one. I mean, you know.
Really?
Yeah, it's fine. You know, one that has 3 or 4 cups of potting soil in it, that's going to give that root system a huge space, and that's what you want. You want a big area. But yeah, just a normal can, like a soup can, is fine. Green bean can, that's a good size.
and what kind of paper do you use?
Did you say what kind of paper?
Yeah,
Yeah, just cardboard.
paper bags or?
Well, yeah, I prefer a brown cardboard box.
Oh, okay.
Just cut up a
How do
box.
you get it to wrap?
You bend it. It works just fine.
what kind of box? A cereal box? Is that what you said?
No, a normal cardboard box that has two sides on it with the little wavy paper inside to make a good
Yeah.
cardboard. So they're
I've
pretty
not had that.
heavy, but
Yeah.
they work good, you know.
And it'll wrap okay, obviously, around the can. I would think
Yep.
it would be more square.
So then do you plant that whole cardboard container and let it deteriorate, or do you take the plant out of it when you plant it?
Yeah, you plant the entire thing. That's why you do it out of the cardboard, is because then it will deteriorate. That cardboard is excellent fungal food, so it's going to help feed your soil.
Okay.
A lot of people are worried about cutworms. You know, a lot of soils have cutworms. And so if you,
Say that again?
a lot of people are worried about cutworms.
Yes.
And so if you're planting that paper pot down in there and you leave it up out of the soil about 1 inch, then your roots will go down in, but your cutworms won't get in there and hurt your plants.
Now with that sticking out, does it dry out more readily then in really hot, dry weather after you've transplanted?
Well, yes, but you're supposed to have 2 to 4 inches of compost on your soil also. And generally, when you have that big of a detritosphere on the soil, you don't have cutworms anyway. So if you're following the soil health principle of having that that soil that's covered with that heavy covering of compost, then it's not going to be a problem, because it doesn't really dry out, you know. If you find that your soil is drying out, that's the way you fix it. You don't add more water. You've got to add a thicker detritosphere on top, which is your compost. So if you've put compost on and you thought you put a lot on, go out there and peel it back and actually measure it and see if it's 1 inch or 2 inches or 3 inches. I recommend 4 to 6 inches, and most people don't do it because they think it's way too much. But the biggest problem with gardens is they don't have a big enough detritosphere. You've got to have a thick one. Your plants will reward you greatly for having 6 inches of compost on there.
And I know you talked about compost before, William, but we don't have compost.
Well, we have a composter, but
Yeah, it's not
nothing
ready.
is ready.
It's still composting. And so I don't know what we can use for compost.
You can use wood chips. They'll do the same thing to create that detritosphere.
Okay, we'll have to find a source for that then.
And I guess green chips or green mulch is
Grass,
that the same thing?
you don't want grass in there. You
No,
don't want
green
grass.
mulch, green chips. That's what-
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're talking about though. With I'm not sure I know what green chips are.
Right. Well, the nursery that we buy from sells green chips, green mulch, as opposed to and part of our problem is that when they mulched our property, they mulched it in brown painted mulch. How would that work? I guess it works just as well.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a good idea not to have anything that's painted,
Exactly.
because the entire point, I mean, there's benefits to the mulch, okay? And some of the side benefits is it retains moisture, but you got to remember that's just a side benefit. The number one main point of that detritosphere is to feed the microbes. And you're going to have to bring in extra specialized microbes to decompose all that dried paint that's on it. So it's better to not start out with all that.
Yeah.
You just want the natural, just chipped up natural native vegetation and not worry about what color it is. It's all going to turn gray anyway after a few weeks in the sun. Even after a year, the painted ones start bleaching out too. I mean, a lot of times they do.
part of our problem is, yeah, we could go buy just regular wood chip mulch, like at Lowe's or whatever. We can't use the little stuff because it'll blow away. We have really strong winds where we are.
Yeah, that's true. You want it to be coarse enough that the wind won't blow it. That's right.
And the same as with little tiny wood chips, like, you know, if you buy a tree that's in a bag, you know, what do you call it?
Bare root.
Bare root tree in a bag, it comes in wood chips usually. And,
Yeah,
and even those are too fine, they'll blow away easy.
right,
So how
right.
would we weight, what would you suggest to weight it down?
Well, if we have a high enough edge on our garden,
No, they still blow across.
Yeah, if you're wanting to weight down your wood chips, if it seems very
Yeah.
counterintuitive. It seems like we're going backwards if you're gonna have to weight down wood chips. Just get wood chips that are big enough that they're not gonna blow away in the first place.
And then you can put maybe some dry leaves on it too.
Yeah, dry leaves are gonna blow away faster than the wood chips.
Yeah.
so,
Yeah, I'm thinking underneath, just something to give more
yeah.
depth to it all. Okay. I'm finding that some of my things are not sprouting.
carrots, for example, well,
Yeah.
we've tried planting the seed in the soil and right into the garden, and it hasn't germinated yet.
Yeah. Yeah. So carrot seeds, if your carrot seeds are if they're too deep, they won't germinate. If they're too shallow, they dry out very quick. So you have to keep your soil moist for 2 weeks to get those carrot seeds to come up. You want them to be planted less than a half an inch deep. And if the soil dries out, they probably won't come up. So if it hasn't been 2 weeks, you need to be patient. If it has dried out, go ahead and replant. And so this is a hard time to get them to
Yeah,
germinate
we're gonna have
in June, because June is pretty hot, you know. So if you are
Hot
gonna
and
replant them, cover them with a board. Just like if you're making a row, if you had a 2x6 board, just plant them, water them, put that 2x6 board right on top of the row, and that will keep it moist so that they will come up. But after about 5 days, you need to be looking under that board every day, because as soon as they start to germinate, you have to take it off so they can get light.
Okay, try that.
good idea. Look at that. Or we could use cardboard. No,
No, it's gonna blow away too. We got wind so strong. It was crazy here this last week, 2 days, and it was nonstop. And so, yeah, everything dried out. And my peas that I planted over a month ago, no, even longer than that, in a pot, not a pot, but a planter pot, about 6 inches deep. They're only like 3 to 4 inches tall still.
Uh-huh. Have you fed them anything? Have you given them some fertilizer?
I did when I planted them. Do I need to do it again?
I
guess
mean,
should.
if they're not growing, excuse me, if they're not growing anymore, they probably need some plant food.
Okay.
somebody talked about humate.
Yeah, just like a really good plant food would be like a fish emulsion. It's, you know, it's just natural stuff. There's no weird things in it that would kill any of your microbes. So a fish emulsion or a fish hydrolysate. You can just buy a gallon of it from your local big bucks garden center. They'll have it.
Or IFA, what's that? Someone's called IFA. Okay. Yeah, we should have got some humate today.
Well, fish emulsion. Then
And we could have got that there too.
Yeah.
They got 10% off.
okay,
Okay.
sounds good. So are we the last ones online?
I think so, yeah.
All right, well, we'll let you go, I guess.
Okay,
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah,
I always have questions. Oh, I do have a question. Today I learned more about the Three Sisters form of planting.
okay.
Do you know anything about popcorn? How does it grow? Is it like I got some popcorn seeds and they're big and round. They're not the little tiny
Yeah,
kernels.
yeah. So yeah, popcorn grows exactly like any other corn.
Okay. Does it support, will it support beans growing up it? Like some of these stalks of corn don't support because they fall
So
over.
yeah, so you got to understand that there's like 4 main classes of corn. You've got dent corn, popcorn, flint corn, and sweet corn. And then there's some other weird ones that we're not going to worry about. But within each of those groups of corn, you're going to have dozens of different varieties. And so when you just talk about popcorn, it could be 4 feet tall stalk, or it could be like an 8 or 9 foot tall stalk. It could have heavy stalk strength or weak stalk strength. They can mature early or late. All of those classes, those 4 classes of corn, can have those characteristics depending on the variety. So it depends on which variety you have, whether or not it's going to be a big, strong stalk to be able to support a bunch of green beans growing up it.
Okay. And then have you ever planted anything other than squash? Have you ever done the Three Sisters method?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, you can plant all kinds anything, you know. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not, there's nothing to not try. It's not going to mess it up if you plant a certain crop out there with it.
I was wondering what your experience has been. Have you ever planted something like cucumbers in place of beans, or pumpkins instead of squash, or melons instead of squash?
Yeah, so we've had all kinds of melons. We've had we used to grow a lot of casabas and a lot of cantaloupes, a lot of
Yeah.
all kinds of muskmelons out there, watermelons, all of that stuff will do good in a cornfield. And then your legume is going to be the bean family, so you could grow any type of bean out there. You just have to pick your varieties depending on your climate. Like if you want to go with the runner beans, you need hotter climates. They do better in the Midwest and the South. If you want just a normal green bean, they do better kind of in the Intermountain West and the northern states.
Oh, cool. Okay. And the popcorn we have is a really big puff when it pops.
Uh-huh.
We got it at a popcorn factory.
Okay, fun.
They sell popcorn. They have different flavors, and when we did a little tour, they gave us seeds, and that was 2 years ago, and I've sprouted them.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Sprouted them to see if they were viable before
Uh-huh.
we plant them, and they are. I need to get them in right away.
Yeah.
How much do you need between the corn stalk and the beans and the squash?
Okay, so I would plant your, if you're gonna do it that way, plant your corn about 3 feet apart in the row. Like your rows are gonna be 3 feet apart, and then in the row, plant each kernel about 1 foot apart. Okay,
Okay.
and then you can put your beans in the same row as the beans could be in the same row, but then I would put so in between every one, so a bean at each corn stalk, right? So they're all a foot
Yep.
apart too. And then whatever you're doing for your vines, like the squashes or the melons, pumpkins, whatever cucurbit you're growing in that family, I would want to grow those in probably plant those in the furrow, meaning right between your rows of corn. I mean, that's just how I do it. And that way the roots are spread out a little bit. But it works great that way. It'll work out for you. If you have a big weed problem and you're going to be cultivating it with a machine, then they all need to be in the same row. But if you just have a small garden, you can separate them out a little bit.
This year, everything is pretty much square foot garden.
Okay.
Or 3x6
Uh-huh.
or 4x4 now, because everything else is almost planted. And then, yeah, so I guess I could get 3 corn stalks in one 4x4 garden. It sounds like, or 4. Yeah, 4. And then put
Well,
my
yeah,
beans
you're gonna
in
want more
there.
than that. If you're doing 4x4 foot squares, I would put, so you got 4 feet on one side, but then it's 4 feet the other. I would just kind of, you're gonna get more light that way because I'm assuming you have a pathway all the way around the 4 foot by 4 foot area. And so you have more light
Yes.
penetration. So you could put
Yes.
a row on one edge, like 1 inch inside your grow box. Put like 5 corn stalks there. So 1 in each corner, and then 3 in the middle. And then you could have a row right down the middle and then the same on the other side. So that'd be 15 corn stalks you're growing, 15 green bean plants, and you're going to plant those about 2 or 3 inches away from each corn seed, or even right next to it. And then your squashes, you could maybe put 4, because squashes get
Okay.
pretty big. So about 4
They
of
do.
them.
They're going to grow out. I think they'll grow out of the 4x4 garden.
Yeah. So that's how I'd handle a 4 foot by 4 foot square.
We actually have starts for squash. So they can
Okay.
just go in.
Yeah. You want to be, you got to think about how these things are growing. Your corn is going to grow kind of slow at first and it needs maximum light. If your squash plant is growing faster, excuse me, and it's shading the corn, then it's not going to work out good because your corn will never grow. Your corn needs maximum light to get going and to grow really well. So usually what I do when I do this, I will plant the corn and the corn grows up to about 6 inches tall. And then, so it has about 3 leaves, 3 to 4 leaves. Okay. And then I will go in and I'll plant the green beans. So this is like 2, 3, 4 weeks later when we plant the green beans. And at the time that you plant your green beans, that's when we plant the squash. But that only works if you have a long climate. You have to have frost-free days for 110 days minimum to do that type of thing. So that would never work where I live because we have an 80-day growing season if we're lucky. We may have a much shorter season than that because we had our last frost. Well, we don't even know because we never know until the year is over. But we had a frost 2 nights ago here.
Oh my goodness.
So, well, you know, we live in the mountains. We expect that. We know that that happens. The old timers here tell us that they've seen frosts every month of the year here. So we're at a high elevation in the mountains. So that's, you know, so I don't do it that way. I have a window of 2 weeks when I can plant here, and that's it. So people talk about planting their spring gardens and their fall gardens. I've got 2 weeks to plant everything.
Well, we had our last freeze, I think, maybe 2 weeks ago, if even that. I don't know. And now it's hot and dry, and the wind blows, and it dries everything up on the ground really fast. And it's
yeah,
hard to
right.
grow things here.
Yeah, that's why you have to have that thick detritus on top. You got to go back to those soil health principles we've talked about in other classes, and you got to follow those, because that's what's going to make your food actually produce, is by doing those soil health principles. They're not just good ideas to think about. We actually have to do those. So you have to keep that soil covered. And when you cover it with all of that compost, that is called your detritus sphere. And you have to, and it needs to be thick. The thicker, the better. If you could have an 18-inch detritus sphere, you would produce more food in your garden than you could imagine.
That's like growing potatoes in a bale of hay.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Okay,
Thank you so much.
you're welcome. Thank you, guys.
We got some good
Appreciate
ideas.
Okay, I think I'm gonna go ahead and close this meeting down for tonight. I think we've answered all the questions. And if there's anybody on here who has any more questions, you better speak now or type it into the chat and we can get to those. Otherwise, I'm gonna go ahead and shut this down. Thank you for joining me. And same time next week, Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific time. And if you need more information, I teach many more classes. You can go to my website at www.georgicrevolution.com to find about all the classes that we teach. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful gardening evening.
Thank you, William.
You're welcome.